Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Kramer. I have Jothy with us. We are going to talk about startups, technology companies, the grit that you have to have as an entrepreneur. That's going to be a great topic. I know it. Jothy, you have a lot of grit, and we've talked a little bit about this. You and I, on your podcast. It was so good that I had to make sure that we addressed it for my audience. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here and excited to talk to you on your show.
On the other side of the mic. So, for my audience, Jothy is amazing. You have a pretty extensive business background. You've got a pretty intense life background as well. I'm looking forward to sharing some of your wisdom with our audience today. Let's start by giving everyone a little bit of a background, a little overview of who you are, what you got going on, just so they get a feel for who's Jothy.
Uh, the business part, the personal part, or both?
Well, definitely the business part, but of course, we need to know a little bit about you as well.
Okay, well, the backstory is that as a teenager, I unfortunately got diagnosed with a very rare kind of bone cancer that only hits teenagers. It's so rare. There's only 1,000 cases in the United States a year, out of 320 million people, uh, and it requires that your, in my case, right leg be amputated. Um, Pretty hard to deal with when you're 16. Um, And unfortunately, it's an aggressive kind of cancer, which tends to remain in the bloodstream. And when this happened to me, chemotherapy had not yet been invented. And unfortunately, 3 years later, it metastasized to my lung, and I had to have my left lung removed. And so that's a moment when you either kind of collapse into, I don't know, feeling sorry for yourself, and I don't know what you do at that point. I didn't even think about it. Instead, I decided to figure out how to do the things that I cared about, um, with my situation, including, skiing, and I became a double black diamond skier. Um, Biking, I've bike biked with, you're just pulling up and pushing down on one pedal, from Boston to New York 4 times, and I became a competitive open water swimmer. I swim from Alcatraz Island to San Francisco every summer, and I've done it for 29 years. Next year will be a big one, my 30th. And I do all those things because the thing that happens, of course, is that you start to lose your self-esteem. It takes a huge beating. You're getting stared at, and things aren't easy, and you struggle a little bit, and that kind of, wears you down, and so you have to have something that you can have complete control over, can accomplish, and that builds you back up. And that's the relevant part that carried over to business many years later, because this all happened from the age of 16 to 19. Um, and I finished college, and I went to grad school, and I was a little bit driven to take on the hardest thing that anybody would tell me about. Somebody said, well, you're going to want to get a master's in computer science before you get your PhD. I said, screw that. I'm just going straight for the PhD. Um, and so I did. I got that. And then I was a professor for a few years. This was all at Duke. And then I was working on a project that was so amazing. It was for NASA. It was a research contract from NASA to build a space flyable single board, big board supercomputer to go on board the space shuttle. And what we built actually really worked well, and it was, just fantastic. And I said, why is this amazing thing going to just be used on, five spaceships, and that's it? Why isn't this thing going to benefit everybody who might want it? So that was the beginning of the startup itch. And we were in North Carolina, obviously for Duke, and at the time there really wasn't any way to really build a startup in North Carolina. So I moved the family to Silicon Valley and did the first startup there. And we had a pretty good run. We made 100 supercomputers. They were the size of a four-drawer filing cabinet, so much bigger than that single board. But they were incredible, just amazing performance out of something that didn't need a raised floor and special air conditioning. And so it's kind of the first time that a supercomputer could just be sitting in your office. Um, but you don't have, that's not a barn burner of a company. You're not going to sell that for, huge amounts because the market for supercomputers is so small. So that was one that was more, I racked that up as, okay, that was fun. Got a little bit of a taste of startups. Certainly had the itch because I wanted to do another one. And so we ended up migrating across the country because I had worked at another company that moved me here, basically. And so we got to Boston, and I've done 8 more startups in Boston. I'm still involved with my 9th one, and they've been in a variety of areas, all high tech and some software, mostly B2B software, and then some hardware based, and in industries as varied as internet infrastructure. Uh, I did one for the broadcast television industry. I did one for the Hollywood special effects uh, side of things. And then the current one is another cybersecurity company, a hardware-based one. And the in that process, we all make mistakes. And um, I've tried not to make the same mistake twice, but you never know for sure if you're going to pull that off. And all those years, I was writing down what had happened and what I did right and what I did wrong. And that ultimately, many years later, like a year ago, finally, turned into my latest book.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about that book. But for context, I want to share with our listeners that you had some wins with some of those exits, correct?
Correct.
So let's talk a little bit about that. You had a rough journey early on, but it developed you into a really driven, high achieving individual. Now, sometimes we see just the bullet points. You went through some pretty rough stuff early on with the cancer and losing a leg and a lung. But then you also had some major successes. Um, Obviously, there's ups and downs in there. And you mentioned, your book includes a lot of the wisdom that you've gained from those ups and downs. Talk to us a little bit about, no, we don't have to go too deep into it, but of all of those startups that you've done, um, what have some of the highs and the lows been for you?
Um, so a big high would be the first one when I came to Boston. So it would have been my second one overall, second startup overall. It was a group of people. There were five of us that were the founders, and I had come to Boston because the big company in Silicon Valley that I worked for after the supercomputer startup wanted to do an acquisition that was a small startup in Boston that was going to get pulled into our company and my division. I was running a division. It was about a 300 million P&L for this company called Borland. And this acquisition was really critical to my division because these were the days when we were just transitioning from using our desktop computers to do everything, and everything was suddenly becoming networked, and everybody was instead of having a little database on their own machine, they were talking to a back end database like an Oracle, and we needed a way to help people do that easily. So that was the group, that was the acquisition. I came out and made that happen. But then Borland ran into its own troubles. We decided to stay here anyway, and people from that little startup here and I decided to go do something different. And but we were going to use their basic technology to do this different thing. And this was the early days of the web. So we're talking 1996, and essentially most people talk about the web being born in 1995. And that year, the Super Bowl had an ad put by Victoria's Secret that was a very seminal ad because it got the viewers of the Super Bowl very excited about what they were seeing, and they were encouraged during the ad to go visit the Victoria's Secret website. So they did, all of them, and it crashed. And people didn't understand that that's what happens when you get flooded and your web server can't handle it. And so we immediately reacted to that and said, we can solve this problem. And we built the first load balancing system for the web. And so, you always say when you're in a startup or you're coming out with a new product, you say, what's the size of the market I'm going after? Is this a really great market? Well, you have to, you think about it. The market we were going after was probably at the time the biggest possible market that wasn't a consumer market that you could imagine. And so we come out with this thing, and we get Fidelity excited about it. In fact, they were investor and our customer, and then and it grew really fast. And we only raised I think a total of $4 million, and we were doing 2 million in revenue, and we got bought for 106 million. And so that's a positive.
So I love it because you've experienced the challenges associated with a startup and growing a company of that magnitude. You've experienced the high points and the low points. And that's what we look for when we're looking for a mentor or a coach or an expert, someone to guide us on our journey. We're looking for someone who has both the positive experiences, but also the negative experiences. And there are a lot of people out there that are just showing off all the positives. And that looks all well and good. But I know from a mindset perspective, when someone invests with a coach or a consultant, or they're even just investing in some type of digital training program that is so focused on just all of the the sparkle and glitz and the dream outcome when the average person doesn't have like amazing out the gate success. They have a tendency to internalize that as there's something wrong with me. I don't have what it takes. I can't figure this out. I'm not good enough. I must not be worthy of the success. People don't like me. And that's just the way the mind works. But when you can cross reference the potential to achieve a high level of success with whatever your business goal is, or life goal for that matter, but then the individual who is helping you to get there can also say, listen, friends, it's normal to have setbacks. It's normal to have um, limiting beliefs adversely affect you. It's you do have to develop that inner resistance, or inner resilience. You do have to develop that internal grit. That helps weather those storms that every business is going to have. So I want to use that as our segue to talk a little bit about your book. So let's spend some time giving people a little bit of a highlight reel of what's inside.
Okay, so uh, yeah, your comment about spending too much time on the positives is what most books do. And I made a conscious decision. So the story I just told about the great success, I probably spent 2 paragraphs in the entire book just just telling that story because a more valuable story might be the following, which is highlighted in the book, and it's about making a conscious decision about is is an opportunity that someone is putting in front of you actually good for you or good for them. And so here's that story. I had When I was looking for a role that would help me improve my skills, just my ability to be a CEO. Uh, I talked to an investor who I had met with that was helping me look at the funding opportunities for that one I just told you about, the one that did so well. And I went back to him later and I said, his name's Paul. I'm not going to tell his whole name, I said, I really need to have more sales and marketing. And I'm not going to go get an MBA. I want to do it by just, working with somebody. He said, I got 2 opportunities that we should take a look at. One is Avid. Avid is a company that makes the editing software that all the big Hollywood movies use. So you'll see their name at the very end of the very end of the credits at the end of the movie. Um, and the other was this other company that was called Novasoft, and it doesn't exist, and it hasn't existed for a long time. Um, it's and he said, go interview at both of those places. I'll set it up. So I met with the CEOs of both of those places, and the idea was that I would come in as a CTO, but I would be working with a CEO who had great sales and marketing acumen. And I came back to him and I said, boy, they're both great. Which do you think would be the best one for me? And this is when I misunderstood the motivations of the person I was talking to, because he said, oh, Novasoft. And it's true. Novasoft had a great CEO a new CEO who seemed great and had been a sales guy before. So obviously had good sales chops. Um, Avid, shortly after that, um, took off and went through the roof and did extremely well and would have been a phenomenal experience. Um, but Novasoft was a problem for Paul. And so it turns out that my going there was the right thing for Paul, not for Jothy. And just a quick summary of what happened there. The CEO that I was going to join, within 6 months, the fiscal year ended, and uh, he had he had budgeted for doing 21 million in revenue, and he had spent accordingly, but the company only did 11 million in revenue. And so one day I get a call from the chairman of the board who said, "I'd like to take you out to dinner." I'd been there 6 months, and I talked to the guy once, and all of a sudden I'm being invited out to dinner. So I knew something was up. Um, and we were eating dinner, and I finally said, "Why are we here?" And he said, "Well, we fired the CEO this morning, and we would like you to be the CEO next." I said, "Really? I've learned all this great sales and marketing stuff and in 6 months, and you think I'm ready to be the CEO of this thing?" And he said, "Well, look, we can't attract a CEO from the outside. So either you take the job or we're shutting the company down tomorrow." I now made my second really bad decision, which was, okay, I should have said, "You're right. You do need to shut it down tomorrow. I don't really want my first gig as CEO to be a turnaround." But that's not what I did. I felt I was concerned about the customers. I was concerned about the employees, all good things. But it didn't end up saving the thing because I worked my butt off to try to turn this thing around, changed its name, changed the focus, to try to really make it, do well. Of course, I had to clean up the mess from the previous guy, and I had to raise money because he'd spent so much. And then, you know, a, a year later, I had good results. I had a new product. I had first customers were GM, 3M, and Fiat. So we were rocking and rolling, and I just needed a little bit more money to get to cash flow positive. And the board meeting, which was on a Halloween, I remember that day vividly, and I was so excited to explain everything to the board, and we only need to raise a couple million, and they said, "Okay, good. You and your executives step outside for a minute." That had never happened before. We're outside, and we're outside for half an hour, so this wasn't good at all. And I walked back in, and they said, "We've decided to shut it down." I said, "Why?" "I did everything you wanted. It's on track." They said, "Because it's been 7 years since we first invested in this company, and our LPs are tired, and they want to write it off. Game over, full stop." Horrible, horrible set of experiences for me.
How would you, if you were giving advice to someone, not in that situation, because that's not a super common situation. And we have a lot of people in a lot of different industries, and some of them are solopreneurs, and some of them are CEO founders of their own little business that they've built from the ground up. But we've all had those experiences that make us feel like we're going to vomit. Those turning point moments where you're just like, where the fuck do I go from here? If someone feels like they're in a situation, maybe not even as dire as that, but they're sitting in a situation where they've kind of gotten the wind knocked out of them, what guidance would you give to somebody who is going through that? Now being able to look back, having had other successes, what guidance would you give to someone who needs to push through that moment in time?
I think once you're an adult, everyone has been through something difficult, whether it's a relationship thing that happened, or uh, or physical illness, or you know or even the upheaval of moving across country when you're in high school, something. And and I already explained what something I had that was difficult, but I try to put things in perspective. It's like, okay, so They're shutting the company down, and and I don't have a job tomorrow. Um, but it's not as bad as breaking up with a with your girlfriend or boyfriend, or it doesn't affect you nearly as much as those kinds of things. You can get another job. You can pick yourself up. Um, and so I think the first thing you do is you put it in perspective. Yes, this was, whatever it was hard, painful, maybe unfair. But you can put it in perspective. And then what I did in this situation was, and I think this is the second thing I would advocate is, okay, the old saying, you've got lemons. Can you find a way to make lemonade out of it? And so what I did in this situation was I realized that we'd worked really hard and we'd actually filed a couple of patents on the new stuff since that other CEO had departed. And so I went to the board and I said, I'd like to buy these patents. And they said, okay, $1 million. And I wasn't sure if that was right or not right. I didn't know, but I went out and started to pitch the a new company to some investors. And I said, the first $1 million you put in would be to buy these patents. And they didn't bat an eye. They thought that was okay. And then one of the board members said to the rest of the board, wait a minute, I think he's trying to flip this and we should double the price. And they told me that. At which point I said to the group that was helping dissolve the company, there are law firms that specialize in that. And I asked the woman I was working with, and I've been very, I think helpful to her. What do you think these patents are worth? And she said, well, all I can say is this. If you wait 3 weeks, I'll give them to you for $65,000. So I I waited 3 weeks. I bought them off of the uh, basically the liquidation list for $65,000. I started my next startup, which 7 years later I sold for 125 million. So you can make lemons out of lemonade, even when things seem kind of bad.
I love it. And that's my entire philosophy on life. They they talk about it in the classics that everybody should read, like Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. It's a universal principle that a lot of people don't realize. We live in this universe which is based on laws. Now, we only understand the laws of nature, like the law of gravity, but there's a law of polarity, which most people understand. You can't have up without down. You can't have hot without cold. Everything is on a vibrational spectrum. You cannot have a problem without a solution. You cannot have anything that's an adversity without there also being an opportunity somewhere on that spectrum. And people, especially business owners who are in the trenches dealing with what oftentimes appears to be failures and setbacks and obstacles, have to find a way to shift their mindset to see the opportunity in everything. And that's part of obviously creating success, but it also is somewhat of a requirement if you're going to make it, because otherwise there's so many apparent opportunities to say doesn't work, won't work, isn't working, can't work, right? And I love your story because it's such a beautiful example of how you didn't give up in the face of adversity. You leaned into that opportunity and you found something that then became so much more successful and more valuable for you than what you originally had that appeared to be taken away from you.
Mhm.
So now let's talk about the book. Let's share with our listeners what's the title of the book, where can they get the book, because they should probably read the book.
So it is called Tech Startup Toolkit: How to Launch Strong and Exit Big. That's this that last part is the subtitle. Um, it's uh, it's published by a publisher, traditional publisher called Manning, and they have a website, Manning.com. It's available through them. It's also available through Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And the Manning people will really do a pretty good job of marketing, but I don't think it's going to get more than 10,000 copies sold if they just did it. I'm hoping that through other efforts, it gets into the hands of a lot more people. It doesn't matter, you know, the author doesn't make money either way, unless your name is like Britney Spears, you don't sell millions of copies. But I think it is a different kind of book than most out there. Most entrepreneurship books are one of two things. One is they're the person writing it has had this huge success and they are, highlighting their success and, you know, I had a unicorn and made $1 billion and isn't that wonderful? I don't find that type of book particularly useful. The other kind is very didactic, and it just says, it's formulaic too. It says do this and do this and I have to have a few parts of my book that are didactic, but in general, it's written like a memoir of, a person who's running a bunch of different startups and has ups and downs and I distilled it down to 31 topics. So there's a topic about, hey, if you're starting a brand new thing, who should be the CEO? I I certainly had a question about that. Um, how do you decide who are the founders? How many founders is reasonable? There's going to be a whole bunch of people that are kind of coming together, but there's going to be some that are founders and some that aren't. And how do you deal with that? Um, how how do you build a good culture? And what do bad cultures and what do good cultures look like? Um, I talk about boards. I talk about board observers. I love that word because most board observers don't know what the word observe means. They like to talk at board meetings. And it talks about how to raise money, which I've had to do a lot of. And I've gotten relatively good at it. And I've raised it through angels and I've raised it from VCs. And I lay out exactly how you should build your pitch deck and what works and what doesn't and why. I talk about why investors cannot be your friend. That's a counterintuitive thing because they're so friendly, they're so welcoming, and of course they're very good at at that because their business depends upon that. But when if there's a point in time when the investors and the interests of the investors and their LPs versus the interests of you, the CEO, let's say, and the rest of the company are not completely aligned, uh, well, you'll go and you'll go fast because the CEO gets 100% unwavering support of the board until it's zero. It's never in between. And so I have uh, a lot of topics like that I talk about in the unfortunate situation where you have to do a layoff. How should you do it? What are the wrong things to do and why? And I did some of those, and I explained. I do that in the form of a story, and also I have a thing on how do you get ready for an acquisition. If that's, and I end the book with that one because that's such a nice positive one.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and highly recommend to our listeners that they get a copy of your book. Jothy, how else can our listeners connect with you?
I have a website, jothyrosenberg.com. I have all the episodes of the podcast there. I have um, things about the book, as well as my personal memoir, which is called "Who Says I Can't." And if if you're looking at the YouTube, that's on my shirt too. Um, it's sort of my mantra, who says I can't? It's a, it's a rallying cry and I use it to myself all the time. And, and then also, there's some other things on the website, and there's a way to reach out to me there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
I really enjoy our conversations. We've been spending a lot of time together lately, and I have to say it has been enlightening. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with my audience today.
I love doing it, and I enjoyed the conversation with you as well. Thank you.
And of course, have to thank all of our listeners. You know we're doing this for you. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do so. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.